Oh, that's it. All right, we're here. You ready?
Yeah, bring it on.
I'm here. I'm back with my friend Greg Coles. Oh, I should do this so it doesn't look like we just recorded 2 episodes back to back.
Oh, there you go.
So this is my change of outfit.
Do I need to like roll up my
There
sleeves
you
or something? Like I don't know.
You can show off your tat.
Oh yeah.
What's the verse again?
Oh yeah. So it says Hudor pulu udenesetai spesaitain agapen kai potamoi usum clususin autin, which is it's the Song of Songs 8:7.
Which means in English,
many waters cannot quench love, and rivers cannot sweep it away.
That's such a wow. Okay, I would love to unpack that, but we got to talk about
It's true.
some other language related to homosexuality. So in the last, I don't even like that term too much, but anyway, if you haven't watched the previous video, then I want you to go back and watch that. If you're listening to podcast, then go ahead and listen to the previous podcast with Greg Coles. I'll try to put part 1, part 2. This is all post-production stuff that I haven't done yet, obviously. So in the last episode, we focused largely on your story, you coming out to your parents, and how just people, especially parents, should understand just the coming out experience. And you also gave some thoughts on if you're a late teen, early 20-something, you're gay, you're a Christian, some advice to them on coming out. So if you missed that episode and would like to learn more about that, or if you want to get to know Greg and his awesome book here, Single Gay Christian. Is it?
No, other side.
It's other side?
Yeah.
Oh, it's other side. Okay,
there you go.
So
hey, our faces blended together don't look too bad.
Really?
I mean,
all right. I should wear my glasses.
We should do a hybrid, yeah.
Let's talk about language. The term gay can be troubling for some people, and even in like evangelical circles in the last couple of years, 3 or 4 years, there's been a massive debate about whether somebody should ever use the term gay, even if they hold to and are living by a traditional sexual ethic. There's something about that term gay that some people would find problematic. And I think there's some thoughtful people who have raised some good questions. And we'll get there in a second. But when you say the term gay, Single Gay Christian is the title of your book. Help us understand maybe the various ways in which the term gay can be used. Maybe I definitely want to get into, is being gay a sin or not? What's the relationship between gay or simply wrestling with same-sex attraction? Yeah, all that jazz. I'll just let you go for it.
Yeah.
Beginning with, what does the term gay mean?
Oh, well, so the fun thing about language, one of the reasons that I was able to get a PhD in English and not feel like I had used up all of the things that there were to say about rhetoric, about how language works in the world, is that language is just a wonderfully complicated thing. So when we say, what does the word gay mean? Maybe the more appropriate question is, to whom does the word gay mean? Who's listening, and what do they understand the word to mean? So when I was growing up, and looking for a word to describe the experience that I was having that was not the norm, and I searched online and in books for a word to describe it, gay was the word that I found, and that was the word that seemed to be prevalent in society. Of course, there's this thing that happens in all across the world. It happens in the church and it happens outside the church, where pretty much everyone seems to assume that if you are gay in your sexual orientation, that also means that you will be engaging in certain sexual activity that also goes by the name gay. And so all of those things can sort of get easily lumped into being gay.
Or being gay means you're having gay sex, you want to get married to someone of the same sex. Like, there's a whole package kind of deal.
Sure. Yeah. But it's clear that the word gay in society doesn't necessarily mean all of those things, because otherwise it would be completely meaningless to ask a question like, can someone be born gay? Because the idea, can someone be born having sex with someone of the same sex? No, it is a physical impossibility. The infant is incapable. So clearly the word gay in that context simply, can someone be born with the propensity to be attracted to the same sex, is really all we mean. And even though I would generally say, like, by gay I mean attracted to the same sex, I would maybe even caveat that a little further and say, like, having the capacity or the propensity over the course of time to be attracted to the same sex when I'm attracted to anyone. Because, for instance, at the moment, I'm sitting in a room with one other person. He is male, and a delightful and very handsome fellow. But I am not currently experiencing any same-sex attraction.
Come on!
I'm sorry, you're very handsome and all, but like, I think if we imply that like to be gay is like to always be experiencing attraction, that can lead to a sort of an over-sexualization of gay people, which I think often happens across the board, but especially in the church, actually, when people begin to equate gay with sexual activity.
Well, it's like I'm straight, which means I'm attracted to females. Well, that's 3.5 billion people on the planet. Am I just walking around slobbering after everybody? Like that?
One hopes not.
Although
I have met some straight men who I wonder. Yeah.
But for some reason, for straight people, when they hear gay or same-sex attraction, even, they don't give that same kind of nuance to sometimes that term. But,
sure. Yeah. So I think it's useful to distinguish the capacity to experience attraction to a specific experience of attraction, which could of course be an opportunity for temptation, and then we need to draw a line between temptation to lust, for instance, and actual lust. It seems to me fairly clear, though granted there are many Christians in this conversation who I don't think are unintelligent, but who would say like experiencing sexual temptation is itself already sinful.
Do you want to name names? No, we're not going to name.
I will not name any names. I will simply say that I find that argument uncompelling.
Go, keep going there. Okay, unpack. How about this? Why don't you step into the argument, unpack what it is, and then do your best to maybe respond to that argument.
Sure. So the argument, as I understand it, and feel free to give more. You have more of the theological training than I. The argument goes thus. That there are temptations that come from outside of us, and there are temptations that come from within us. And this would largely the idea of temptations coming from within being already morally culpable is taken from the book of James, which talks about like person is tempted when they are enticed by their own evil desire. I can't unfortunately quote the whole.
There's like a desire giving birth to sin. It's James 1:15 and 16.
Like, temptation when it is when it is fully grown gives birth to no. When does the fully grown happen? Oh yeah, temptation when it conceives gives birth to sin, and sin when it is fully grown leads to death. There we go. Like between the two of us, we can kind of quote the Epistle of James. Perfect.
If I knew how to video edit, which I probably could figure, I would have a verse.
Like put the text.
There's a lower third right now. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know.
And then we can check and see how correct we were in our recitation.
And if we're not, then what we do? We're screwed. I'll have to do a jump cut.
Yeah. Anyway. So temptations from outside and temptations from inside, and so these folks would say that, for instance, to know that Jesus is tempted, so that would be one of my arguments, like Scripture says Jesus is tempted in every way just as we are, and yet without sin. They would say like Jesus was tempted from outside. He was tempted from without, and so that was a sinless form of temptation. But they would say temptation that comes from within, that stems from the evil desire of the intrinsically fallen human person, that comes from our own total depravity, to take the Reformed term here, that temptation is itself a morally culpable thing.
Okay. I mean, that's like an Augustinian kind of more Reformed reading, right?
Sure. Not everyone reads Augustine that way, but
I've always found it. I mean, when I hear same-sex if gay means let's just say gay is a synonym for being attracted to the same sex and not the opposite sex. Okay, that would be a standard kind of base level.
Beautiful.
It at least means that.
Yeah.
No more, no less unless somebody fills in more of a definition. And yet, so if gay means that, then straight means being attracted to the opposite sex, not the same sex. So for me, it's more of a categorical statement about which kind of human, whether the male kind or the female kind you're attracted. So in one sense, when I say I am straight, I do mean I'm attracted to females as a kind. When I say I'm straight, I'm like, that doesn't mean I'm only attracted to a very small subset of the female kind that I'm physically attracted to or whatever. It just means females, not males. So on a very broad categorical level, that can't be sin, because I'm not attracted just to I'm attracted to females, even though most of them I wouldn't even be tempted to lust after, or wouldn't even, So I don't know, just on that broad categorical level, that's how I've always understood same-sex attraction, which makes it hard to understand why that would be, again, a morally culpable sin. I have no problem saying it's a product of the fall in the same sense that, say, I don't know, and I know we can get trouble here, but maybe like a physical, even a psychological disability might be a product of the fall that isn't necessarily a morally culpable sin.
I mean, resisting all of those analogies, because I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable saying it's a product of the fall in the same way that what we know as heterosexuality is a product of the fall. That seems to me a comparison that is quite apt here.
Okay.
But I would say I love how I'm winding up arguing for the inherent moral culpability of same-sex orientation. Like to your earlier comment. About how can just the general capacity to be attracted to guys be morally culpable in a way that the general capacity to be attracted to women isn't. I think the argument that would be made here is that in the that there's no telos for a sexual attraction to someone of the same sex.
That's true, yeah.
that can be expressed in a biblically defined marriage between male and female. And so because there's no telos of that kind, that means that the only direction that attraction can take you is a direction that is
You're really stepping into that argument really well. I don't know if many people who even believe in that could articulate. So how would you respond to that, the telos thing? That sounds pretty compelling.
Well, so number one, I would challenge the question of the inherent moral culpability of being a product of the fall.
Oh, okay.
And this is so at this point, I don't think you have to agree with me on this point to potentially still agree with me that same-sex orientation is morally culpable.
Okay.
But this is a point where I would diverge with at least a good handful of my Reformed brothers and sisters and siblings, in that I would say I don't think that the fact that we are fallen is something for which we are morally culpable.
So there's please.
Well, I was
going to say, in a sense, there's very different theological anthropologies that maybe a Reformed crowd and a more Wesleyan crowd are going to hold to, and that's going to affect how they understand this conversation. Well, yes. I think you or somebody made a joke earlier today, well, if you're super Reformed, I mean, and I would lean Reformed, so I'm not. It's my camp, okay. I mean, and because it's my camp, I can kind of tease it a little bit. It's like, for the super Reformed camp, it's like just breathing is sinful. Like you're just being human. It's like your category for humanity is sinful.
which just to tag onto that, I once had a conversation with a dear sibling of mine with whom I disagree substantially. This particular sibling has referred to me as a heretic before, but we have had some conversation on the subject.
Yes.
And in that conversation, this person read aloud to me a quote from my own book, where I'm wrestling with sort of the discovery of being gay and wondering, does God hate me because of this? And I wrote, I wrote that I didn't remember choosing to be gay, and I wrote, is it possible to sin just by existing? Is it possible to unwittingly defy God with every breath you breathe? And this person read aloud that quote to me and said, I'm sorry to tell you that the answer is yes.
Right.
And I realized, if you think the answer to that question is yes, you are already in sin with every breath that you breathe.
Right.
Well then sure, tell me I'm in sin for being gay, but also tell me I'm in sin for wearing a t-shirt today. And again, we're not. I don't think we're going to solve the Reformed Wesleyan, differences in this conversation. But
so from my vantage point, I understand I think even as you've articulated, there's some I would say good arguments in the sense that they have some deep theology. They have verses. I'm not gonna just say, oh, I can't believe anybody would ever believe. There's some meat to it, and yet I would still I think there's other concerns too about the ontology, the ontological weight that is credited to somebody's humanity when you use a term, for instance, like gay Christian. It just linguistically feels like your Christian identity is placed side by side with something that should be much lower on the scale of contributing to the ontological significance of who you are. And I know I'm getting, you can Google ontological. It's my word of the year, as you know, from editing some of my books. So let me just give where I was going with that. So from my vantage point, I can see the concerns with the term. I really do. And I might even fall on the side where you're at, but I can understand the concerns. I think some of them are really legitimate. Some of them I think just they're kind of tone deaf. They haven't really understood what somebody's saying when they say the term gay Christian. But my big thing is, let's not divide over this. I mean, this is kind of a distant secondary point to the larger conversation about sexual ethics, Christianity, the year 2020, what it means to even hold to this really Amish looking kind of sexual ethic that, a traditional ethic might be perceived as. So let's come to if we both agree on a traditional sexual ethic, my goodness, can we just say that everything else is kind of more secondary, and we can dialogue about it. We can even debate about it. We can get into we can get into forthright exchanges and then break bread, drink wine, and hug and call each other not a heretic, but a brother and sister in Christ. Is that fair? I mean, is that any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I would certainly say, like, broadly, again, I understand people who think differently on this question, and I do think to the degree that those folks are willing to see somebody like me and say we can absolutely still celebrate what we share in common. I think to the degree that we can manage to get unity in Christ with each other, it seems like kind of a big deal to Jesus. Like, he seems kind of excited about the prospect of his followers being unified. So I think if we can get there, even across differences of opinion that feel incredibly important to us, incredibly personal. I won't lie, there are people for whom it is really hard for me to get excited about the prospect of sharing eternity with them. And the fact that it is hard for me to get excited about the prospect of sharing eternity with them is precisely the reason why I need to lean into unity with them.
That's good. I mean, there's probably not a Christian on earth who, if they're honest with themselves, wouldn't say that. Like, oh my gosh, that person, we all have difficulty with other people within the broad camp of Christianity.
Sure.
Okay, so the term gay Christian specifically, and I did talk to Wes. You mentioned Wes Hill. I talked to Wes about this on a podcast a while back. Can you unpack what? Okay, so I still get a lot of people, and maybe people watching, I'm sure, like, okay, I get what you're saying, but that term gay Christian, I just can't get my mind. Like, why would you put your struggle right next to your Christian identity? This Christian identity is primary, is pure, is sinless, is everything, and then you're front loading this experience you have, which must be subservient to your identity in Jesus. Why would you put that right next to the term Christian? You want to respond to that? I'm trying to mediate those concerns.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if your Christian identity is sinless, like, wow, remarkable. I've never met one before who was sinless. Amazing. I would much prefer myself to take the posture of Paul and saying, like, Christ came to save sinners, of whom I happen to be the worst. But that question aside, so I think it's important when we talk about adjectives. It's important to understand that adjectives do a couple different kinds of things. Like, there is not one kind of adjective in the world. So let me give you an example. Let's talk about cheese. So we have cheese, and we could say, like, oh, like, is it yellow cheese or is it white cheese? And when we add those adjectives, we're not really altering what we would have generally understood by the word cheese. We're just giving more specific information about the kind of cheese we're talking about. But let me add a different adjective.
So you're not elevating the whiteness of the cheese over the cheesiness of the cheese because you said white before cheese.
Well, I'm just giving you I've given you a broader category, and I'm giving you a little more specific information. But let me give you a different kind of adjective put in front of the word cheese. Toe cheese.
Ew.
And suddenly we've added an adjective, and it has had the power to fundamentally change the substance of the noun. Now this is. I'm sorry. You're trying to drink coffee.
Well, because I was imagining this. I love cheese. I used to love cheese until 5 seconds ago, and I was imagining this block of, like, I was even thinking, like, this cheddar, what would be cheddar? I'm like, and then you said toe cheese, and
well, and And can I be real with you? Honestly, I think that's how a lot of straight people react when they hear the word gay Christian.
Wow.
They take this thing that they love so much, and then they put something in front of it that frankly disgusts them, and
Mm.
all of a sudden they can no longer conceive of.
Mm.
But the important thing is that they take the adjective um, as fundamentally changing the nature of the noun.
Okay.
They thought they knew what the noun meant, and then all of a sudden the adjective is there, and all of a sudden the noun is twisted to mean something entirely different. Um,
Interesting. Mm.
Now, this is a thing. This is a thing that is very possible to do with the word Christian. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and sometimes it's possible for us to do it with the word Christian, even with adjectives that would otherwise be potentially neutral. Let me give us an example. Let's talk about American Christians. I would posit to you that there are two kinds of American Christians in the world. There are those who are giving us a broad category. I'm Christian. And then they're saying, also, let me give you some information that may be helpful with regard to my nationality. My national identity, I have an American passport, or maybe I have never left the country and have no passport, but I have an American citizenship. And so that's useful information. And it's, in fact, if you live in America, I think you should acknowledge the fact that you're an American Christian, because I think it's important for you to think through the question of how your national identity relates to what your obedience to Jesus is going to look like.
Okay.
But I have also met a different kind of American Christian in my life. And it's the kind whose Americanness seems to so fundamentally inform what they think it means to follow Jesus, that somehow Jesus is really excited about making sure that America is the number one country in the world. And Jesus is really excited about the prospect of us going off to kill people in other nations to make sure that Americans are absolutely kept safe at all costs. And Jesus is really excited about America getting more and more prosperous at the expense of the nations around us. The idea that Jesus is in favor of those things is so antithetical to the gospel that to be that kind of American Christian is to fundamentally be a kind of Christian that I no longer recognize as a follower of Christ.
And yet the same phrase can be used by both people. American Christian, American. Are you a Korean Christian? South America? What kind of? Oh no, I'm an American Christian. That would be the more softer. Like, oh, okay, you're wondering about where I happen to live, my national identity, however that plays a role. But the other one is more like, clearly their primary identity is American, and Christianity is it's almost like Christian becomes the adjective to color the noun a little bit. That's super helpful. So when you say, so again, for somebody who holds to a traditional sexual ethic, it does bewilder me. I'll be honest, that somebody like yourself can be very counterculturally convinced that the Bible defines marriage as between a man and a woman, and out of allegiance to that Christian teaching, say, I'm committed to celibacy because of this. Clearly your gayness is not on the throne. Like, and yet somebody could still, I mean, do you still get that? Like, Greg, your gayness is not on the throne. Jesus is on your that's got to be so disheartening to hear that. Like, I don't know, I just don't have a category. Quibble about the language all you want. Some of those quibbles are worthy to have.
Sure.
But to tell somebody who is maintaining a traditional sexual ethic that their gayness shouldn't be on your throne. I don't call myself an adulterous Christian, is how some people, the analogy they give, which is, I think, problematic for many reasons. Yeah, is that?
Well, it's frustrating, it's irritating. But here's actually the thing I dislike about it the most is that I think it's actually spiritually dangerous, because I think the more people tell me, Greg, I've heard you use these words, and here's what they are doing to you.
Right.
Here's what is happening in your soul right now. Functionally, those voices become in my life the voices of the accuser with a capital A, who is speaking words of death into me. And there is a time when my mind will hear those things over and over again and be like, you know what? Like, everybody says I already lost, so like, why not just prove them right?
Yeah, no, totally.
And I would add, in addition to that, like, so I think part of the reason that the phrase gay Christian is so much debated is that it is it's ambivalent. It has multiple kinds of possibility and power in the same way that something like American Christian does.
Okay.
And so there is very much a way in which it is possible to take one's gayness and to make that the defining feature that so fundamentally alters the nature of what you call Christian faith that it ceases to look like obedience to Jesus Christ.
In an email, a few months ago, I was emailing somebody. We're having this discussion. It was a great brother or sister in Christ, I forget which one, about because they were concerned about me using the term gay Christian, and I in the email I remember writing, I think I didn't even plan it this way, but in passing I was referring to Christians who had gone through a divorce, and yet linguistically sometimes it's easier in passing to say, you know what, I know some divorced Christians that have a healthier view of marriage than some Christians who haven't been divorced. And I didn't plan it that way, but then I came back and said, and I don't know if you noticed, but I just used the phrase divorced Christians there. Not because I was trying to elevate their divorcedness and bake it into their identity as a primary category. It's just linguistically, rather than saying a Christian who has gone through a divorce, a Christian who has gone divorced Christian essentially means the same thing. It's just more linguistically expedient. Is that, I mean, when I use the term gay Christian, oftentimes I catch myself now because I know some people are like, they won't listen to anything I say if I use that phrase. But when I say it, that's all I mean. It's like, I could spell a Christian who wrestles with same-sex, but it's just, is that okay from a linguistic perspective? Are there other categories or analogies you can give that we do that all the time?
I mean,
white cheese is a great one.
Well, you didn't like it so much when I started there. White cheese that is white. I mean, that happens in so many languages. Greek, for instance, a language that Preston and I share a common love for. There are two positions that you can put an adjective in when you want to modify a noun. There's the one where you put the adjective before the noun, and there's the one where you put article noun, article adjective. The cheese, the one that is white, is how you would translate it if you wanted to keep the word order from Greek and bring it into English. But there's no set, like when we are translating Greek into English, there's no sense in which accurate translation would be like, well, you see here, like, clearly, like, because it was put before in this case, that means it's fundamentally altering the substance of the noun, and if it's put afterward, that means it's not no, I mean, there may be some sense of emphasis potentially depending on the passage. I think depending on the passage, you'd really have to crawl on all fours to make it word order. But as far as Greek grammar is concerned, really they're just grammatically equivalent structures, and the same is true in English.
What about, so I've often heard that even the term same-sex attraction, or SSA, the acronym, that's not really a neutral phrase, because it was kind of birthed in the cauldrons of, I'm mixing metaphors, birthed in the delivery room of ex-gay therapy, for lack of better terms. It has been kind of traumatic for some people. Have you heard that? Do you have any thoughts on SSA? People say, why not just say you're same-sex attracted?
I mean, that's an argument that I make in my book about why I chose not to use the term. I mean, I think it's worth noting that prior to the arrival of ex-gay ministries, it was perfectly normal to use the word homosexual, which was the prevalent term at the time, in the same way that the word gay is now the more prevalent term. So C.S. Lewis, for instance, writes a letter about a pious male homosexual, by which he means, a person experiencing same-sex attraction, a celibate gay Christian, but that was the language he had at the time. The emphasis on language as the primary thing that people needed to change in order to become acceptable, really came, with the ex-gay movement, and it was especially leaned in on once the ex-gay movement began to realize, like, oh crap, like, we're not actually making people straight, but we can at least claim them as success stories if we can be able to say that they are no longer gay, and define that as they no longer identify themselves as gay. And so it becomes a way
a shift in identity rather than a change of attraction.
Right. And so there was a sort of a moving of the goalpost by the ex-gay ministries to say, like, here's how we can produce successes even though we're not actually producing the thing that people think we're producing, which is heterosexuals.
Good. Let's see, we're at 30 minutes. Let's do some quick ones on language, okay? You mentioned the term homosexual. Most, especially younger people, don't prefer to be called a homosexual. Do you have any thoughts on that? How is I don't want to put your words in your mouth, even though I know what words are going to come out of your mouth. But for somebody that might be like, "Whoa, I can't say homosexual," like what advice would you give to somebody on that term?
Yeah, well, so homosexual it feels like an old term. It tends to feel
Mm-hmm.
like a clinical term, and it's actually not uncommon in English that if you take an adjective and then you put an article in front of it and make it substantival. So by which I mean like take the adjective homosexual and make it the homosexuals, or take the adjective black as a descriptor of race and make it the blacks. Both of which are constructions that most of us can recognize. By the way, if you're like, oh, what's wrong with saying the blacks or the homosexuals? Please don't, because they're both considered really offensive. But those constructions are recognized as offensive
Okay.
more readily. But the thing about homosexual, even as an adjective instead of as a noun,
Mm-hmm.
is that it tends to feel clinical. It tends
Mm-hmm.
to feel old and sort of distanced and removed. And in fact, because most gay people don't prefer the word homosexual, there was once like this web app that was created by a conservative Christian um, to substitute the word homosexual for the word gay every time it appeared in online articles. So you could get like a plugin for your web browser so that when the word gay showed up, it would just substitute it for homosexual.
Why? They just didn't like the word gay.
Because they were like, oh, because like gay is clearly like the ideological, and it was almost like a stick it to the
Oh,
man kind of thing. Like, we know you would rather we call you this, so we're gonna call you that instead.
so it was at least self-aware enough that they knew there was a difference between
Oh
the two
yeah,
terms.
oh yeah.
Because you prefer this term, we're not going to use it.
And I feel like and this is true for homosexual, but it's true for so many words in this conversation. It can be really easy to get sort of caught up and even terrified by the idea of like, there are so many things I could say wrong.
Right.
I can't say anything at all. I probably shouldn't talk to anybody who's gay because I might offend them.
Yeah.
Like, the more important thing is to have a posture that says like, hey, like, help me understand what words
Right.
are honoring to you. If I use a word that you don't prefer, let me know and I'll try to
Right.
use different words.
Yeah. It's more the posture than the actual words.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I mean, just to give an example of this, not to take us too far afield here, but with regard to the question of using the pronouns that trans people identify themselves with, which is something that I've literally written an article for Preston that probably got him in a little bit of trouble, but explaining why I think it's really, really valuable for us, regardless of what we think about gender identity ethics. I think it's really valuable for us to use the pronouns by which people identify themselves as a way of honoring them. Now, so I made this argument. I believe this argument with every fiber of my being, but still, when I'm talking to trans friends, especially trans friends who have just recently switched and begun to say like, hey, like, I'm going through this process, I would now prefer they them pronouns for myself.
Yeah.
I can be absolutely 100% there with my heart and say like, great, I would love to do that, and still the habit is just so much within me.
I do it all the time.
I screw it up all the time.
Yeah.
And I can think of a time just a couple months ago. I was with a trans friend and I kept accidentally using the wrong pronouns. And I apologized the first time and they very graciously said like, no worries, and they said like, I appreciate the fact that you're trying. And after that, like, sometimes I got it right, sometimes I screwed it up and was just like, no, I mean they, and then and over time I got more in the habit. But the important thing for my relationship with that person was not, they weren't looking at me and waiting for me to screw up so they could be like, how dare you?
Right.
But the fact that I was willing to say like, how can I use language in a way that honors you, in a way that demonstrates my love for you? Like, it was that was significant to our relationship.
How about the term gay, the gay lifestyle? Thoughts on that?
I mean, there's what even is a gay lifestyle? Like, Neil Patrick Harris and I are both gay. We both have lifestyles, but they're like different sorts of lifestyles. Preston has a straight lifestyle, but it's a little different than Madonna's straight lifestyle. What do we mean by lifestyle? Really, what we seem to functionally mean is like engaging in same-sex sexual behavior. But the unwillingness to name that, the pattern of trying to talk circuitously around something instead of simply naming the thing, it tends to be it tends to create some stigma around the thing itself. It's actually a bit of a shaming move to say, this is something so heinous that I can't even name it, and so I'm going to come up with euphemisms. I'm going to euphemize it out of existence.
That's how it feels. I don't know if anybody intentionally does that, but that's it comes off
I think that's part of the part of the reason is just like, what is a gay lifestyle? Like,
right.
there are so many of us. We live very, very
It's very
different
stereotyping,
lifestyles.
right? It's very like
Right, as if
broad
there were
brush.
exactly one way to be gay.
Right.
So that's like its conceptual problem. But even beyond that, I think there's a problem with euphemism writ broadly. That anytime we euphemize, the thing that it indicates is I can't speak the name of this thing to you. Interestingly, getting back to the word gay just briefly, this is, I think, part of the power that I've found in naming my orientation as gay, and part of the reason that some other people are like, no, don't say it, is because they have an expectation that, like, oh no, like, if we give the thing the name, then that's going to be terrible. Like, we must euphemize it. But the reality with language is that if you're never willing to speak the name of something, then it becomes sort of the eternal antecedent that you can never speak, but it's always understood. Kind of like if you remember, it's the he who must not be named. We can't talk about it, and because we can't name it, it has that much more power over us. And so for me, my sexuality had so much more power over me when it was the thing that I could not speak aloud. And as soon as I developed the capacity to just say, like, I'm gay. I'm
it didn't become all this overpowering kind of. I mean, yeah, we all have struggles, and I'm sure it doesn't make it. Didn't make you straight.
I have by no means arrived.
No, that totally makes sense. It's with anything, right? I mean, if you have an addiction, maybe you're a victim of abusive past. I mean, naming that thing can be a step towards. I almost said healing, because in certain contexts it might be healing, but a step towards healthy living in light of your experience.
And certainly there's healing to be had. Like when I say, like, I'm suspicious of people who are like, you're gay, you need healing. You know, I'm suspicious of the idea that, like, becoming straight is healing, but, like, certainly I need healing in my life on such a variety of realms. You know, I just don't think that, like, the healing I need is becoming straight. I think the healing I need is, like, Jesus to move more deeply in my heart, to strip away the layers of sin and to make me more like him.
Okay, practicing homosexual. Are you a practicing homosexual? I love that you just crack up. So there's certain people that I think there's people know, like, what's he laughing at? Like,
I mean, yeah, practicing. Well, I think this construction is funny about a number. Like, obviously, we say other things like practicing law, and I think that's funny. Like, I chuckle at all of them, but practicing homosexual in particular, it makes it sound like I need practice. And I always feel like, no, like, I didn't need to practice like this at all. This just kind of happened.
You're quite good at being gay. Just
a natural gift. What can I say? Yeah. No, but again, I think beyond that, I think the problem with that phrase, in addition to, it's sort of like gay lifestyle. I mean, it has a different set of issues, but again, it's the problem that euphemizing the thing means that you can't just have a conversation about what we're trying to say. And again, if you're saying practicing homosexual, well, again, we don't love the word homosexual, but are you saying that to be homosexual or gay in orientation, to live out that thing in any way at all, is inherently to have sex? Because if so, what you're doing is, again, looking at someone like me and saying, well, obviously the only thing you should do with your orientation is go have sex. In which case, again, your voice becomes the voice of the accuser, being like, well, here's what you might as well do because you're already there. Whereas I would say, au contraire, like, I absolutely think that it is possible to have a same-sex orientation and yet live in a way that is honoring to God.
Yeah.
And the way that is honoring to God, as I understand it, does not involve sex with sex outside the covenant of marriage at all. And so to use a phrase that implies that the only possible end for my sexual orientation is in sexual physical behavior.
It has an unintentional.
It's sort of like an automatic condemnation, in the same way that the gay lifestyle is like, well, Greg's gay, like, there's only one lifestyle he can live. Like, no, the whole point is to discover, like, how do I, within the unique experience of the world that I have, how do I get to follow Jesus? How do I get to reflect the glory of God in my life?
Let's do one more. The gay agenda. A lot of these have overlapping by now. You know.
I mean, yeah. So all the things we've already said, et cetera, and so forth. I mean, number one, gay agenda makes it sound like we have these meetings and get together, like all of us somewhere. And I've never been invited to one. But another problem that I have with that phrase is that it seems to assume that if there are things that gay people all share as wanting in common to see happen in the world, that those are inherently bad things that Christians need to oppose. If there is such a thing as a gay agenda that every gay person I know wants to see happen in the world, that gay agenda includes things like decreasing anti-LGBTQ bullying in schools.
Yeah.
It includes things like getting homeless LGBTQ kids off the streets.
Which, if you're human, let alone Christian, you should be like, okay, I agree. That's probably good. Like,
yeah. I hope that you want to get the LGBTQ homeless kids off the streets.
Yeah.
I hope that you want to see suicidality among LGBT kids fall. Those are the things that are on the gay agenda. If such a thing could exist,
even if you disagree with the means by which some people are trying to accomplish that,
sure,
you can agree. You can be the most conservative Christian, whatever, and still say there are some end goals here that are also resonating with Christianity. Even there's just fundamental disagreements with some various pathways on how
absolutely. To get there. And in that case, by euphemizing it and making it something that we don't talk about, we miss the opportunity to find common ground, even with people who think really differently than us on a lot of questions, on faith broadly, on sexual ethics. There are still ways in which we can partner with those people and say, like, hey, like, I see that this is a real matter of concern for you, that you have a heart for the marginalized, homeless, LGBTQ kids that you are seeing on the streets. Hey, guess what? I know a Jesus who also has a heart for the marginalized. Let's work together to see how we can help that group of people.
And I've seen people partner in that way, and it's a beautiful thing. I have a little video clip of Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family, not your bastion for liberal ideals, right? And he got together and befriended Ted Trimpa, who is I know he's a gay activist. I don't know if he had a political position or whatever in Colorado. I think it was to fight against a growing concern about sex trafficking going on in Colorado.
Wow!
And they shared together at the Q conference. I have a little clip. It's like a 2-minute clip.
That's awesome.
And it's just beautiful because you hear not only did they come together and fight a common thing, but presuppositions were deconstructed. Here's Ted Trimpa, and his friends are like, "You're going to meet with Focus on the what? Like, and then they became friends. And I think he might have even lost friends over it. I can't verify that. But then he started tearing up almost, talking about how when he was having open heart surgery and they flew him to New York, the one person that flew out there and stood by his side was Jim Daly.
Wow. And
he said, he even said, Ted, who's not a believer, says Jim, I felt the presence of God in you because your friendship I knew was 100% genuine, and it was a beautiful. Awesome. I don't know how you can be a Christian and not say that is a beautiful thing. And they even said in that clip, we fundamentally disagree on something, okay, and it has an important aspect of my life, Ted. But we can have a friendship across that because we have found some kind of common human ground here. It doesn't mean we lose our convictions or lighten up on our beliefs, but we can still be passionate about certain areas of common ground while holding on to our differences. How much do we need that in 2020? I almost went political, but we're out of time, folks. Any last words on language? Somebody listening that wants to understand the language. Do you know any blog exchanges that unpack the term gay and same-sex attraction?
It's funny that you should mention that. I do know a blog exchange that happened on the Center for Faith website between myself and Rachel Gilson, who is a singularly delightful human being. She works for Crew, and so she does not prefer the term gay. She would describe herself as same-sex attracted to the degree that she describes herself as anything other than happening to be married to a man. So she and I had a good back and forth, and we ended that back and forth. We wrote three posts back and forth, but then we ended by co-writing a post about sort of our hopes for the future, kind of landing on that note of the value of unity.
I'll put it in the show notes. If you don't see it in the show notes right now, it's because I just flat out forgot. So drop a comment in the YouTube thing, and I'll post it there. So for those listening on a podcast, I think I'm supposed to say, it's so hard to do both for me. I got to get in the rhythm of doing both. So you've been listening to Theology in the Raw. Join us next time. If you want to support this show on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/Theology in the Raw. And I guess if you're watching on YouTube, you can do the same thing. You can go to patreon.com/Theology in the Raw. Support the work that we're doing here. Greg, thanks for hanging out in my basement.
Thanks for having me in your basement.
Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Next time you're in Boise. All right. Peace out.